Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 7, part 2. Now, in part 1, I've shown you conclusively that Folien 1 could not have been from a drinking glass. The top and bottom lines on Folien 1 are not circular, therefore they could not be from a drinking glass. I've also shown you how the top line could have been made on a DVD cover, and I've shown you how the bottom line is completely consistent with the way that Constable Swart said he lifted prints from the DVD holder. And in today's episode, I'm going to present even more evidence that Folien 1 is not from a drinking glass, but from the DVD holder that Inge rented. But before I start, I just want to acknowledge my brother Thomas Mollett. Without his hard work and dedication, and his intelligence and his brilliance, none of this episode would have been possible. Lots of what you will see here today is work that he have put in, discoveries that he have made. He started the story, and I'm just finishing it. Now, throughout this episode, please remember that the court's decision to declare Fred van der Vyver innocent was based on an acceptance that Folien 1 came from a drinking glass. There has been a huge miscarriage of justice. And I will show you in this episode the role that Pat Wertheim and Arie Zeelenberg played in that. I know that at the end of this episode, there will be some people, although they may accept that Folien 1 is not from a drinking glass, they will still believe that it is not from the DVD holder, because they so firmly believe in Fred's alibi. That is why in the next episode, I will look at Fred's alibi and I will show you that it's not worth the paper it is written on. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Before I get into it, I just want to talk about the experiment that Pat Wertheim did, as I will touch on the results of his experiment throughout my presentation. So from each one of these glasses, Pat Wertheim took a lift after performing the following drinking action. First, he picked up the glass with his left hand, then poured water into it from his right hand. He then put the glass and pitcher down and picked up the glass with his right hand, and then he took a sip from it and placed it down again. After he took a lift from each glass, he compared them to Folien 1, and he concluded that the lift from his glass number 2 matched Folien 1 the best. And here we see the lift, and this is a photo of glass 2. According to Wertheim and Zeelenberg, this mark was made by Fred's bottom lip. According to Wertheim, this mark is parallel to the rim and is consistent in size, shape, and location to a lip print. I assume he came to this conclusion on the basis of comparing it to the lip print on his own lift. So this is the lip print on his lift, this is the mark on Folien 1, and it is pretty obvious there are some significant differences. Most noticeably, the mark on Folien 1 is at an angle and not parallel to the rim as Wertheim claimed. And it stops in the middle of nowhere. So Arie Zeelenberg tried to provide an explanation for the obvious skewness of the semi-elliptical mark. So in this slide, he shows how one would normally drink from a glass, progressively tilting the head back as the glass empties. And then in the next 3 slides, he completely disregards that and claims that when the glass touches the nose, the glass cannot be emptied. And then somehow your hand compensates for that in a way that will result in your lip leaving a skew print on the glass. And yet, Zeelenberg was unable to replicate a skew print on his own test lift. Here is a lip print made by Zeelenberg on one of his test lifts, and you can see it's definitely not skew, and there is no resemblance between this mark and this mark whatsoever. And here's just another random photo from the internet of a normal person drinking a glass in a normal way with the head tilted backwards. The mark on Folien 1 contains no grooves and patterns that would allow it to be matched to an actual lip print made by Fred. Wertheim said that the lack of wrinkles and grooves is the result of the lip being excessively wet at the time of deposition. But he presents no supporting evidence, marks of his own with a wet lip, to show that such a lip on a drinking glass would provide a similar texture as to what we see in Folien 1. This opportunistic appropriation of this mark as a lip print, without any evidence, analysis, and verification to support the predetermined hypothesis, is not consistent with the principles of an objective investigation and is therefore a major ethics violation. And yet, when this was brought to the attention of the IAI, the International Association of Identification, according to them, Pat Wertheim did nothing wrong. So whilst Wertheim said that the lip was wet, Arie Zellenberg said that the glass was wet with condensation and that the lip came in touch with this condensation. Now, it is pretty clear that there's a problem with Zellenberg's theory. In the photos here, the condensation does not go all the way up to the rim where the lip would have been placed. If the condensation did go that high, it means that Fred filled the glass right up to the rim. And that is certainly not normal. And then we have to ask ourselves, why didn't this condensation impact, for example, the dry drop marks that we see on Folien 1? And why didn't it impact the thumbprint, which according to Wertheim was deposited at the same time as the lip print, and which would have been deposited right into this condensation? And what about the other prints that would have been condensed over after they were deposited? Now, Wertheim and Zellenberg did not take a single test lift of a lip and fingerprints from a glass that had condensation on. To prove that the so-called lip print could not be from a DVD cover, Zellenberg conducted this experiment. He placed a DVD holder and a flat glass in the freezer. And because the DVD cover did not develop condensation after it was taken out, he concluded that condensation on a DVD is impossible. And for that reason alone, Folien 1 could not be from a DVD holder. Now, this is typical of Zellenberg. He conducted these useless experiments to prove absolutely nothing. As with all aspects of our work, we always try to the extent possible to get the opinion of independent experts. Now, regarding the lip print, Thomas traveled to Katowice in Poland to meet up with Lukas Smaki, who at the time was a PhD student, developing for his PhD studies an algorithm for the identification of lip prints. Now, his conclusion was that there is nothing in the mark that is consistent with a human lip. Now, Thomas's visit certainly garnered a lot of media interest. So here we have two random photos from the internet and a lip print made by an independent fingerprint expert. So if we look at the ratio of the height to the width, we get 0.42, 0.45, 0.51. They're all larger than 0.4. But when we do a similar calculation for the mark on Folien 1, we get 0.24, which is substantially smaller, which means that this mark is comparatively too long and too thin. It's also unnaturally skewed and ends in the middle of nowhere. Therefore, contrary to Wertheim's statement, the size and the shape of the mark is not consistent with the mark made by a human lip. So the question is, if Folien 1 was taken from a DVD holder, what could have made this mark? And the answer to that is actually very simple. It was made by a finger in a moist latex glove when the DVD was held in this way. Now in court, during his cross-examination, Pat Wertheim was presented with a test slip showing a glove print. Wertheim said he could not dispute that the mark on Folien 1 could have been made by a finger in a glove. And he also said that he cannot identify the mark as a lip print, and he certainly could not match it to Fred van der Vever. He only said that it is consistent. And this is what Pat Wertheim said in his court testimony. My Lord, I'm not a qualified expert in lip mark identification. I did not intend. If I misled you, I apologize, but I only intended to say what it is consistent with what I observed. But as I stated earlier, I'm not a lip print expert. All I can testify to is what I saw on my test glasses appeared similar to what I saw in Folien 1, and that it was consistent with the lip print. And then soon I will show you that the mark on his print that he compared to Folien 1 was fabricated. And then he goes on to say that the mark on a state's test lip is quite a bit bigger than the mark on Folien 1. And that was true. And part of the problem in this case is how exceedingly poor the state's prosecutors performed. You don't try and convince the court that the mark on Folien 1 was made by a finger in a glove when the mark is noticeably larger than the mark on Folien 1. Why didn't they obtain prints from the officers that could have made this mark? From the officers we know handled the DVD holder, Constable Swartz and Inspector Marian Boysens. Because if they did, they would have found that the finger of Inspector Marian Boysens is a perfect fit. So these photos were taken by Thomas when he visited Marian Boysens at her home. She confirmed that this is how she held the DVD while dusting it. And one of the first things Thomas noticed was how small her hands were. By comparison, this is the finger of Constable Swartz, and you can see it is way too big. Now, if you compare the textures made by known fingers in a latex glove on a DVD plastic sleeve with the texture of the mark on Folien 1, one can see that they are very similar. Just further evidence that Folien 1 came from a DVD holder. Now, coming back to Pat Wertheim's test lift. In this lift, the right thumb mark, which is the red outline, and the lip mark, which is the yellow outline, overlaps. The thumb mark is on top of the lip mark. Now, this is impossible. So according to Wertheim's drinking action, this lip print and the thumb print were deposited at the same time while Fred was taking the sip. And it's therefore impossible for the lip and the thumb to occupy the same space. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is unambiguous proof of fabrication. In addition, Pat Wertheim's lip is abnormally big. You can see the yellow outline here. That's the size of his lip print on his lip number 2. The pink outline is from a lip print made by my brother, and it shows the normal lip print size that you can expect. And previously we have also seen how small Zeelenberg's lip print on the glass was. Now, based on this dimension, Pat Wertheim's lip would have taken up almost a quarter of the circumference of this glass. And considering the size of a typical mouth, the roundness of the glass, this is simply not possible, as I will illustrate in the next slide. So this is a photo of my mouth. It's about 51 millimeters wide. And here Thomas shows you what happens when you drink from a glass. The glass will rest in this area here, and it will not make contact with the corners of your mouth, as you can see here. And therefore, to conclude, the lip print of the glass 2 lift was only possible if it was fabricated, to make it look more like the mark on Folien 1. Wertheim needed a nice big lip print so that it resembles the mark on Folien 1. But even Pat Wertheim could not fabricate a skew lip print. Now, Wertheim needed there to be a lip print on Folien 1, else he could kiss his drinking glass theory goodbye. Now let's look at the left index fingerprint we know was deposited by Fred van der Vyver. To answer the question, was it deposited on the rounded surface of a drinking glass or on a flat surface? And if on a flat surface, could it have been deposited on a DVD holder? Now, according to Pat Wertheim, this print is curved on its side and foreshortened. Now, it's a scientific fact that a print on a round surface will be shorter compared with a print on a flat surface, as illustrated here. So that would be what would be seen on a flat print, and this would be the area that you see on a print from a rounded surface. So there is a definite difference in the length of the print. And here you can also see it. The one in the back is a print from a flat surface, and this is the print taken from a drinking glass. Now, if you compare the flat print that Fred gave to the police with the print on Folien 1, they are the same length. So contrary to Wertheim's claim, there clearly was no foreshortening, as one would expect if the print was deposited on a round drinking glass. So here I myself measured the length of the left index prints on the police card, and this is the length on Folien 1. This print here is the roll print where the finger was rolled from side to side and perhaps tilted slightly forward, and that is why it is marginally longer than the other two prints. So here we can see that the curved print would be about 7 millimeters shorter than a flat print. On a glass, it's about the same size as the glass used by Pat Wertheim. Here you can see on a glass that only this pink area would actually touch the glass, and no marks will be left in this area, as you can see on Folien 1. So here you can see a print on a flat piece of glass that clearly captures this area here. You can see the great similarity between this print and this print, as opposed to this print where this area is not captured, and certainly there's a huge difference between this print and what you see in Folien 1. Therefore, the conclusion is that the left index fingerprint on Folien 1 is not curved, as Pat Wertheim claimed. Now, I might cover this in another episode, but in late 2012, Thomas and I decided to bring charges of professional misconduct and ethics violation with the International Association of Identification. So after receiving a copy of our charge and supporting materials, Zeelenberg went crybaby to Fred's defense team and amongst others said the following: "If we deal with fruitcakes, they are certainly educated." The point I'm trying to make is that Folien 1 was not a fingerprint issue. You don't need to be a certified latent fingerprint examiner like Zeelenberg and Wertheim to analyze Folien 1. That the left index fingerprint on Folien 1 belongs to Fred van der Vyver was never under dispute and therefore did not require the expertise of a latent fingerprint examiner. Folien 1 is best analyzed by people with knowledge of physics, geometry, mathematics, and plain old common sense. From what I can see of the work of Wertheim and Zeelenberg, they clearly didn't possess the knowledge nor the common sense to call themselves experts and to analyze Folien 1 appropriately. Now, Roger Dixon, with his master's degree in geology, one would expect would have had the knowledge, but for reasons that only he knows, he decided to throw all of that out the window to follow the ways of Wertheim and Zeelenberg. Now, Professor Visser, who used to be a professor in physics at the University of Stellenbosch, conducted a detailed analysis of Folien 1 to answer the question as to whether Folien 1 was lifted from a curved or a flat surface. So this was his starting point. Here we have the flat print taken by the police, and here we have the corresponding print in Folien 1. And here you can very faintly see some red dots. Now these are the dots that was used by the fingerprint experts, Captain Bester, to match the two fingerprints to each other. So the question was, what did Professor Visser have to do to this image to line it up exactly with this image so that the 7 red dots are completely on top of each other? If all it would take would be zooming in and out in the XY plane, rotating around the Z-axis in the XY plane, and moving it about in the XY plane in order to get a perfect superimposition without a need for any other type of transformation, then we are dealing with a print that was made on a flat surface. I know this all sounds very complicated, and I will illustrate this by means of a simple example. So here we have 2 rectangles, and we want to know what do we need to do to these rectangles in order for them to be superimposed like this perfectly. So first of all, we're going to scale the blue rectangle down to the same size as this red rectangle. So it's just a matter of shrinking it, holding the ratio constant. And then the next step would be to rotate it in the XY plane around the Z axis, which is pointing straight at us. Rotate it so that the sides are parallel. And then the third and last step would be simply to shift this over so that it lines up perfectly. So if this is all that it would take to line up the red dots between the flat print and the Folien 1 print, it would mean that Folien 1 was deposited on a flat surface. Under the influence of gravity, the shear forces between the glass and the finger would have distorted the print, and additional transformations would have been required to achieve a perfect overlay. And this is to show you how shear forces can distort a print. So here we have a print, finger on a flat piece of glass, and to simulate the impact of gravity, this glass was just pulled slightly down, and you can see the distortion that happens. The angles between the dots change, and even this dot is disappearing at the bottom here. So this is the result of the overlay. This overlay was achieved without the need for any additional transformations to account for shear forces or for the rounding of the glass. Not only does this image confirm that Folien 1 was deposited on a flat surface, but also that the finger was rolled sideways towards the thumb. And the fact that this yellow line is outside of the blue line just shows that the print in Folien 1 was rolled even more than the rolling that took place at the police station. And these are Professor Visser's final conclusions. It serves as unambiguous mathematical proof that the left index finger deposited its print on a flat surface and not on a conically curved surface. It serves as irrefutable proof that the left index finger was straight and not bent when it came in contact with the object from where its print was lifted on Folien 1. The left index finger was extensively rotated clockwise towards the thumb. At the moment the print was deposited and subsequently transferred to Folien 1, even more than when the rolled police control version was captured. Now, according to Pat Wertheim, the location of the thumb and the left index finger is completely consistent with the use of a drinking glass and not consistent with the handling of a DVD holder. So my question is, what exactly constitutes the normal handling of a DVD holder? Is picking a DVD up like this an abnormal action? This action will leave a flat rolled print on a DVD holder with the same approximate alignment and location as Folien 1. Is holding a DVD like this an abnormal action? This action will leave a thumbprint on DVD holder, similar to what we see on Folien 1. Now, according to Wertheim, the combination of all these marks on Folien 1 is consistent with it being from a drinking glass, after Fred used it in the same way he did as in his experiment. It should be noted that this ring finger and this little finger marks are just assumptions by Wertheim, as these could not be identified to any finger. There's simply not enough rich detail to do a proper match. Now, we have already indicated that the lip print was a fabrication, that it's too large and that it occupies the same space as the thumbprint, which is not possible if you follow Pat Wertheim's one-time drinking action. So now let's look at some other tricks that Pat Wertheim got up to. So if you were to repeat Wertheim's experiment exactly as he said he did in his report, and you were to overlay your lift with his lift, some very significant differences will become apparent. So here we have a lift made by Thomas from a glass similar to Pat Wertheim's glass 2, and he superimposed it on Pat Wertheim's lift by lining up the thumbprints. So the yellow marks are from Wertheim's lift. The pink marks are from Thomas's lift. As previously indicated, you can see the difference in the lip sizes, but also on Pat Wertheim's lift, the distance between the index print and the thumb print is too small. It should have been over here. This is only possible if Pat Wertheim rotated the glass anti-clockwise about 30 to 35 millimeters after putting it down with his left hand and before picking it up with his right hand. He did not declare this action. He did this deliberately in order to create a lift that would more closely resemble Folien 1, as you can see here. He needed the distance between his thumb and the index print to be about the same as on Folien 1. But previously mentioned, manipulating an experiment to achieve a predetermined outcome is a serious ethics violation. And I mentioned also that the IAA didn't think that Pat Wertheim did anything wrong, and I will deal with that in another episode. Well, Pat Wertheim caught out in court, and look how he weaseled his way out of it. It's just a great pity that the prosecutor wasn't bloodthirsty enough. So here we have Pat Wertheim holding a glass, trying to explain the drinking action. And then the prosecutor observed that he turned the glass in his hand before drinking. He said, "But you turned the glass in your hand now. Why is that necessary?" And then Pat Wertheim said, "If I did so, Your Honor, it was unintentional. I'm just using normal handling." Now it's time to do an experiment, a very simple and easy one. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and after pausing the video, please get yourself a drinking glass about 80 to 90 millimeters high. Pick it up and just hold it, as if you want to pour water into it. Keep holding the glass and then restart the video. So you can pause now. Now observe the location of your pinky finger. Is it perhaps underneath the glass, as in these photos from Zeelenberg's presentation? Or like in these random internet photos? If not underneath, was it close to the bottom rim, as in these photos? So on Pat Wertheim's lift, the distance between the top of the index print and the middle of the pinky print is about 55 millimeters. Which means that when he held the glass to pour water into it, his fingers were tightly compressed like this. That is certainly not a normal way to hold the glass. It's not impossible to hold the glass like that, but it is not common, it's not comfortable, and it is not natural. I'll let you be the judge of that. Wertheim had to hold the glass like that, in that unnatural way, to get the pinky print in a location that matched well to Folien 1. This, ladies and gentlemen, is further evidence of fabrication. Now let's look at the drop marks on Folien 1. As you can see, there were two types of marks. Two blotches was made by wet drops at the time of dusting, and then you have these dry marks that was on the DVD holder prior to the deposition of prints. Now, according to Wertheim and Zeelenberg, the presence of the dry drop marks and these wet blotches indicated that Folien 1 was taken from an object that has been in the vicinity of water. In what way is it not possible for the dry drop marks to be on a DVD holder? I can think of very plausible ways that drops could have ended up on the DVD holder. For example, quite often watching a DVD is a social event where family members gather while having snacks and drinks. Condensation can drip from containers or glasses that get passed around or picked up. Let's just look at Inge. At about the time she rented the DVD, she also got a cool drink can as part of the cheeseburger combo. Then in her flat she opened the can and poured it into a glass, where she carried it to the coffee table. Similar scenarios could have played out in many households where the DVD was watched. How many of you ever got sprayed by a wet dog? You might have children running around with water pistols. Now regarding the wet drops, We have to keep in mind that the fingerprint team came to do the dusting and lifting of fingerprints about 17.5 hours after the murder. This certainly would have enough time for any wet drops on the object to dry by the time of lifting. It's likely that the little drops that caused these wet blotches were deposited either by an officer sneezing or shedding sweat drops. It was a particularly hot and muggy day. Now this slide illustrates Zeelenberg's complete lack of knowledge about fluid dynamics. He says that because the drops are about the same size, we may assume that surface tension was in play. This means that the spatters did not arrive and dry on a horizontal surface. Now, firstly, surface tension is always present and always play a role in how drops of all sizes behave, whether it's on a flat, vertical, or inclined surface, or when falling or flying through the air. When water sprays out from a source, droplets in a variety of sizes can be generated, some big and some small. And when traveling through the air, some of the drops, due to the size, may become unstable, and due to surface tension, inertia and aerodynamic drag may start to break up until a stable drop size is reached. So what you see on Folien 1 could be the size of the stable drops. And it's obvious that when a drop leaves the source, they obviously do not know if they're going to be landing on a horizontal or vertical surface. So therefore, it's quite evident that Zeelenberg had absolutely no understanding of fluid dynamics, and his conclusions are completely unscientific. Here we can see water drops on a window. I took these photos after a rainstorm. You can see many different shapes and sizes. Here we can see some drops with similar sizes, but they're not all oval. You can see different shapes. Here you can see on Zeelenberg's own experimental lift the different sizes and shapes of the droplets on a vertical surface. This is the result of a spatter experiment that Thomas did on the flat surface of a DVD holder. You also have a consistent maximum size, and they're all consistently oval, not dissimilar to what we see on Folien 1. It's also well known in the science of blood spatter analysis that when a drop strikes a horizontal surface at an angle, those drops will turn out to be elliptical. And you can actually use the dimensions of that ellipse to calculate the impact angle. So therefore, it's not impossible and certainly not uncommon for one to find elliptical drops on a flat surface. These white lines around the drops are called contact line deposits. When the water in a drop starts evaporating, the evaporation occurs at a higher rate around the edges. That causes a flow of water towards the edges as the drop evaporates. During that action, any impurities or minerals also move towards the edges where they get deposited after the drop dries. So on a horizontal surface, they will move to the edge of the drop evenly and form a circle all around it. Now, when the size of a drop exceeds the capillary length of water, which is 2.7 millimeters, on a vertical surface, under the influence of gravity, during evaporation, any impurities and minerals will move to the bottom of the drop. And that is not what we see in Folien 1. Here we have photos taken by Arie Zeelenberg, experiments he did. This is a dry drop mark on a vertical surface, and you can see the thick contact line deposits along the bottom of the drop. And it certainly doesn't appear consistent with what we see in Folien 1. Now, when you look at high definition photos of Folien 1, you will see a multitude of other drop and droplets of different sizes and different alignments. Some going up this way, some going up this way. There's no consistency. What is especially noticeable is the complete absence of gravity. There is no consistency between the drops that shows the impact of gravity. Not in the shape, nor their alignment, not in the contact line deposits, either in the up or a downward direction. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever addressed these little black dots. that you see on Folien 1. In my opinion, these black dots are small indentations in the surface. And what's more likely to have indentations like this? The drinking glass or the plastic sleeve of a DVD holder? Now let's look at the supposed DVD cover. Now look at these indentations. Now in case if you were wondering, now these indentations do not line up with the indentations on Folien 1. And as I explained in my previous video, it's highly unlikely that this is the actual DVD holder. I will tell you what I would have done if I was the murderer. So after obtaining a photo of Folien 1 from my private investigator friends, I would go to the DVD store and rent the actual DVD. I would compare the DVD holder and Folien 1 to see if there are any unique identifying features. And then after noticing that the indentations on the DVD aligns perfectly with the indentations on Folien 1, I would have removed the paper insert and put it in a different DVD holder. In case the police somehow remembers that the DVD holder had indentations and to throw them off, I would have taken my car keys and I would have made a number of indentations at random locations that do not align with the positions in Folien 1. So that later if an overlay is done, this misalignment would just strengthen the conclusion that Folien 1 was not lifted from a DVD holder that Inge took out. You also have to remember this action would have been taken long before the drinking glass theory came to light. As is probably common of most rental DVD holders, this DVD holder shows a lot of scratch marks. We see a big one here and quite a few crisscrosses on this side here. Now, if you look at this close-up version of a portion of Folien 1, you can see what looks like scratches. There's this horizontal line here, this line coming across here. This could be a scratch here. This could be a scratch coming down here. You can see a lot of crisscross marks here. These could all be scratches. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. To conclude, in these last two episodes, I've shown you that the top and bottom lines on Folien 1 are not circular, therefore they could not be from a drinking glass. I've shown you how the top line could have been made from a DVD holder. I've shown you how the bottom line is completely consistent with the way that Constable Swart said he lifted prints from the DVD holder. I've shown you that the semi-elliptical mark has not been made by a human lip print, but by the finger of Marianne Boysen, the person that dusted the DVD in a moist latex glove. The finger is a perfect fit, and it's consistent with the way she handled the DVD. I've shown you that the drop marks on Folien 1 is consistent with a flat surface, not the vertical surface of a drinking glass. And there's nothing about these drops that says that it could not have been deposited on a DVD holder. I've shown you that the left index fingerprint was deposited straight on a flat surface, and that the position of the print is consistent with a typical picking up action, as well as with the thumbprint. I've shown you that the clean background that you see in Folien 1 can be achieved on a DVD holder. I've shown you a video of my brother dusting a DVD, producing a clean lift. So at the end of the day, the conclusion is, ladies and gentlemen, that Folien 1 is not from a drinking glass, but from a DVD holder. We need to remember that the defense, the court, everyone accepts that a lift was taken from that DVD holder. It's just that the defense argued that it was replaced later by Constable Swartz in order to incriminate Fred van der Vyver. So there's really nothing to indicate that Folien 1 is not from the DVD holder. And if you want to accuse the police of criminality or gross incompetence, then the onus of proof is on the accuser, on you. They've tried to do that and they've failed. So all that we're left with is the DVD holder. That is the source of Folien 1. And in the next episode, I will address the alibi, and I will show that the alibi is not worth the paper it's written on. You have been told many lies regarding the alibi, and I will set the record straight. And until then, have a good time.